everybody. My name is Sarah. I'm an AmeriCorps member through Conservation Nebraska's Common Ground program. I wanted to thank you guys for coming to this program featuring Clarice Dombeck, the creator of Healing Roots African Diaspora Garden. So just real quick before we get started, I have a few reminders for everybody. So those of you who are online will have their cameras turned off, microphones muted, so you can't be seen or heard. Any questions you may have can be put into the Q&A section towards the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to answer them at the end of the presentation. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded, so if you miss anything or wish to watch it again, you can find it in a few weeks posted on Conservation Nebraska's YouTube channel. Lastly, there will be a short poll towards the end of the webinar, so if you could please fill out the poll before you leave, we'd greatly appreciate it. It kind of just helps us plan out and improve future events. So with that being said, I'm going to introduce our speaker. Clarice is an Omaha native whose work has always had a strong emphasis on community. She's an active member of Omaha's charitable scene, having experience in roles at organizations such as Spark, Elevate Omaha. She's also currently obtaining her master's in urban studies at UNO, having already obtained a bachelor's in Black studies and sociology. Healing Roots African Diaspora Garden as a project is a result of her dedication to collaboration, growth, and healing for Omaha under a perspective focusing on connection to both the communities and individuals' roots. So now that that's done, I'd love to let Clarice get started. Thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for the introduction. I am here today to talk about my experience as a Black urban farmer. And I would just like to start with sharing a little bit more about my background and why I got into gardening. So with that, sorry, I'm trying to pull up my notes on my phone. 1 second. Okay, so where I would like to begin with that is with my family history. So I am a American descendant of slavery. My family was a part of the transatlantic slave trade, and within that, during enslavement and then after emancipation, my family worked in farming and agriculture. They worked in farming and agriculture in the Mississippi Delta. So my family is particularly from Mount Bayou, Mississippi. And Mount Bayou, Mississippi was one of the many all-Black townships that were established immediately after emancipation. So after emancipation, my family stayed in the area. They stayed in the area for a couple of reasons, one of them being community connections. So the community they knew and loved and were accustomed to lived in that area, and also at the time, my family didn't have very many options as to what they were going to do after enslavement. So my family stayed there and became sharecroppers. I'm not sure if everyone on the call is familiar with what the sharecropping system is, but essentially, and unfortunately, it was often like an extension of enslavement, whereas the land, the tools, the resources were all owned by former plantation owners and former slave masters, or former enslavers, excuse me. And like I mentioned, my family stayed in Mount Bayou, Mississippi as sharecroppers until my grandmother was married at the age of 14. And then from there, she moved to another area in the South. She moved to Tennessee and continued working on farms there until she had the opportunity to move to Chicago. And that would be my family's first time out of that like agricultural and farm setting into an urban setting. With that, my family carried the legacy and the knowledge and the skills that they had gained and had knew about farming and agriculture and animal husbandry and all those things with them to Chicago. Um, Eventually, my family, as they were looking for additional opportunities, moved to Omaha, Nebraska. And that is where I know most about like my grandmother's history and knowledge and skills like associated with gardening. My grandmother always kept a garden in the back of her house, and she always grew things that I saw as grew things that are traditional in African American culinary uses. So she always grew okra. She always grew specific varieties of peppers. She always grew greens. She always grew big slicing tomatoes, which were great for making fried green tomatoes. So like I mentioned, my family was able to carry on those different traditions and different legacies with them from the rural South into this new urban setting. And that begins like my introduction to gardening. And my grandmother passed those traditions on to my mother, and then my mother passed those traditions on to me. Um, so throughout my childhood and throughout my young adulthood, I always helped my mom with the garden that she kept at our house. So that's how I was able to first pick up on those knowledge and skills. And then a little bit more into young adulthood, I was mid to late 20s when COVID happened. And at that time, I was pursuing my undergraduate degree in Black Studies and Sociology. So I was really diving deep into the history of Black American culture and into the impact of Black American culture. And I was able to come across some different books that really highlighted and just really honed in and emphasized like the significance of Black American culinary traditions and Black American gardening practices for me. And from that, I thought, wow, this would be a great opportunity to bring some of that knowledge and some of those skills to the Black community here in Omaha that I'm so familiar with. And that is when I decided I wanted to start a community garden. So I began searching for some different lots that were available in my neighborhood. So I grew up in the Coons Park neighborhood. And a couple different options came to mind, but they all fell through. But I think it was for the better because I would say it was the next spring is when I was able to be connected to someone who had already started a community garden on 24th and Pratt. So through that connection, I was able to take on that community garden and take over as leadership and garden operator for that new space. Um, and part of that meant giving the garden a name because it didn't have a name at that time. So I created a poll on social media. I invited my BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color friends to like, hey, would you like to contribute to this garden? Would you like to contribute to the naming of this garden? Would you like to contribute to the selection of plants for this garden? And the first thing that came out of it was the name, Healing Roots, and that was selected by another community organizer. And from there, the garden just continued to grow and gain a lot of momentum, especially like I mentioned, it was during COVID. So folks had a lot of opportunity and time to spend, and they wanted to spend it in a way that was safe. So being outdoors in a way that was accessible. So a community space within their neighborhoods. So yeah, that is how Healing Roots was started. I don't know if I need to pause to like answer any questions or
I can check and see if there's any questions right now that anyone has. We'll take a quick second. I don't see anything right now, but awesome. Perfect.
okay,
So we'll
cool.
go ahead and get
I'll
started
keep
then.
chatting. Yep. So after the garden was established, I went on the search for resources. Oh, sorry, there was one other thing that I wanted to mention that's super important to the community organizing piece. So at the time when the garden was started, I mentioned it was during COVID. So during a huge and ongoing public health crisis. So in addition to folks looking for safe spaces to gather and safe activities to do, there was also a lot of concern about the supply chain, the food supply chain, and how we were going to continue to be able to have access to and afford fresh and I'll even say culturally relevant foods. And at the same time, the Black Lives Matter movement was happening as well. And that piece is super important to the development of the garden as folks from our community, including myself, were really looking for Black affirming spaces, spaces where we can go and be together, spaces where we could go and heal. So like I mentioned, the Black Lives Matter movement played a huge role in the development of the garden. And as the first year went on, is when I really began to dive deeper into the Black American gardening traditions and traditional African American like heirloom varieties of plants, and also different plants from the African diaspora that could be grown within Omaha, Nebraska, which is one of the questions that I actually get often with it being an African diaspora garden. People ask, are you growing tropical plants? Well, some of them are tropical plants, right? Things like peanuts and vining black-eyed Susan, and we grow a variety of flowers that are considered tropical plants too. But a lot of them are plants that have been grown in North America for a long time and in Nebraska for a long time. So I guess right now I'll just take the time to talk about some of the plants that we grow at Healing Roots and also talk about the significance of those plants to the culture. So the first one that I will talk about, I was going to see if I have any of it here. 1 second. I do. Okay. So what I have in front of you here is Mississippi brown cotton. So last year was the first time that I grew this variety of cotton. And I specifically selected this variety because it was grown by enslaved people in the Mississippi Delta. And as I mentioned before, my family was enslaved in the Mississippi Delta, and my family was also sharecroppers in that vicinity as well. So I wanted to really grow this plant to help deepen the connection that I have to my family and to my ancestors and to the land in Mississippi. And I also wanted to use it as an opportunity to really showcase the cultural and creative value and even economic value that cotton really has always had. So looking back to pre-enslavement times, looking back to before my ancestors made the journey across the transatlantic, cotton and other natural fibers as well were a staple in African, Northern African, Western African cultures. And it was used to create things like kente cloth. And kente cloths have a huge cultural significance in Black culture and African cultures, and can represent a variety of things depending on the patterns, depending on the colors, all those things. There's also a huge association between cotton and another plant of the African diaspora, which I've tried to grow unsuccessfully, what is indigo. So just thinking about how indigo has been used in different art forms for thousands of years. It's also been used to color fabrics and things like that for thousands of years. And both cotton and indigo, plants from the African continent, both are hugely significant to American culture as a whole. When you think about denim, when you think about jeans, how quintessentially American that is, and how denim is really associated with the working class, right? With blue collar workers, and with just like rugged toughness that makes it very American, right? So I am in the process of taking the cotton that we grew at Healing Roots this last year and turning it into paper to then create some artwork on. So again, just really using this as an opportunity, growing cotton as an opportunity to highlight the creative and the cultural aspects of cotton and the influence that the African diaspora has had on that industry. And I didn't even mention that cotton was the #1 export during enslavement, right? And cotton was really the #1 driver of the industrial and like economic boom that the United States was able to see. The second most exported crop that was grown in by enslaved people was actually corn. And again, that's something that's very American, right? It has its roots in Native American culture, and similar to cotton, enslaved people and formerly enslaved people were able to build that industry up with their labor to a point that, like I said, it was the #1 export other than cotton. And very American thing, a very Nebraskan thing, right? And unfortunately, I do not believe I have an example. No, I don't. I don't have an example of the glass gem corn that we grew at the garden last year. But it is
Those pictures are also on your Instagram as well.
yes.
Just for the future, we'll probably be plugging that at the end. So if people want to find that later, I think you have pictures up there as well.
Yes, I do. It is a indigenous heirloom variety, and one of the things I love about it, besides its beauty, is just um the bridging of cultures and the crossing of cultures. Like I mentioned, it's an indigenous plant to the Americas, cultivated by um, the Native American community. Um, but and I'll say it was also deeply important to Black American culture, not in just that we grew it during enslavement, but the different food products that we created from it. So just thinking about grits is a huge staple in African culinary traditions. Also using cornmeal in when you're frying fish, when you're frying chicken, where you're making fried green tomatoes. Again, a huge impact on the culture, and just one of those things that is really, it's known, but I don't think that the knowledge or the history behind it is known enough. So again, that's one of those things that I try to amplify. Um, Another thing that I have to share with you all today is this beautiful mixture of pickled vegetables. And these are all things that were grown at the garden this past spring. So one of the vegetables floating around in here is okra. I'm sure folks are familiar with okra, and y'all might be familiar with the history of okra too. It is originally from West Africa and was brought over by my ancestors during the um, transatlantic slave trade. And just one of those things that I love to highlight about okra, or even just I love to highlight about the journey that my ancestors took, is that they had the foresight to bring these different seeds with them. So they didn't necessarily know where they were going, but they knew that they were going to need food when they got there, right? So okra is one of those plants that was brought over, and it is still a quintessential part of Black American gardening traditions, growing practices, and culinary practices today. Something else that we've got floating around in here is fish peppers. So fish peppers, we've grown them for 3 years now at the garden. And that was actually one of the plants that first really introduced me to, I'll say, the language around seeds and plants of the African diaspora. I had come across them on a seed selling website called True Love Seeds, and just really dived in, growing them and learning the history and story behind them. So fish peppers are another African American heirloom variety. They were cultivated by enslaved people in the DMV area in the late 1700s. And um, they're particularly known for the white variegation in their leaves and on the peppers. And they have been traditionally used in recipes for fish. So fried fish, oysters, crabs. If you think about the East Coast and all the seafood that's over there, those peppers just pair perfectly with it. And for a long time, culinary historians and seed historians thought that fish peppers had been lost, that they no longer had access to a source of seeds. And I want to say it was in the mid 1900s, a source was found. So Horace Pippin, who is a Black American artist and also a seed archivist, had fish peppers, had honey peppers, had just a huge variety of these African American heirloom seeds stored in his basement. And they were able to find and save some of those seeds. And it's just like it's amazing that they were still viable after all that time. But seed archivists were able to bring back that African American heirloom variety that has such a deep roots and value to Black American culinary traditions. And actually, Michael T. Whitty, who is a Black American culinary historian, writes about fish peppers and writes about making, I mean, this one isn't technically the hot sauce. I'll show you the hot sauce real quick. And writes about making this vinegar-based hot sauce that you see here that has actually a variety of fish peppers in it. It has or a variety of peppers in it. It has fish peppers, old pepper pot, bueno mulata peppers, and yeah, those three, all African American heirloom varieties. But he wrote about these old-timey recipes that were created during enslavement. And like I mentioned, one of them being this vinegar-based hot sauce, which is one of those things that my grandmother, and I'm sure other Black grandmothers, always kept around because it goes so well with greens. And greens are, again, another thing that we grow at the garden. We grow a couple of different African American heirloom varieties. And when I tell you that around Thanksgiving, the greens, they go like that, because it's just a huge part of our tradition, you know, and to be able to have access to fresh greens, fresh organic greens that were grown right in your neighborhood, and to have access to those for free. I know I'm supposed to be talking a little bit about like community activism. And it's like, to me, one of the highest forms of activism is the distribution of free food from community members to other community members. And I guess while I'm talking about like the distribution of resources, I will also take this moment to plug in and show gratitude to Blazing Star Seed Cooperative. So Blazing Star Seed Cooperative is a local seed co-op, and it's made up of different urban farmers that have the goal of creating a robust food and seed system, local food and seed system in the city of Omaha. And they are the ones that introduced me to seed saving. They are the reason why I saved all these cotton seeds and all the other seeds that I've saved over the last 3 years. So not only can I grow them again in the next season at Healing Roots, I can also share these seeds and share the seed stories with community. And I guess I said that pieces like activism, because you're not supposed to give seeds away for free. It's one of those things that has been sort of like taken over by like big agriculture, and lots of rules and regulations have been put around it. And I want to say that Alex from Blazing Star is the one who originally said this, but in order to have food sovereignty, you have to have seed sovereignty. So it's just really about having more control over more community control over the food distribution systems and over the seed distribution systems as well. And I guess I'll take a pause real quick to see if we have any questions or if there are any particular areas you want me to touch some more on, Sarah.
Honestly, I think you're doing great. I loved hearing about, the aspect of the culture being passed down, like through the maternal line in your family too. I'll ask a question because I don't know if you've noticed, I've been taking notes to ask you questions also. Um, but I would say, what would you say, in terms of discovering connections to, Black culture and your past and gardening? What would you say would be like the most surprising or uplifting thing that you learned from your research? Like going back, maybe something that you wouldn't have expected was connected to you at all, you realized was connected to you.
Okay. I am just gonna go back to the Mississippi brown cotton, to
Right,
this variety. And it I'm not gonna say it was surprising to me,
right,
but it was one of those things where I just felt immense connection. And I also felt the immense calling to reclaim
right,
reclaim this tradition and to reframe it in a way that is positive.
right,
And because for so long, of course, for so long, we have really, like, I would say, denied the
yeah,
skill, the resources and
right,
the knowledge that it took for um Black enslaved people and formerly enslaved people
right,
to grow the cotton industry and grow
mm,
the corn industry and grow the indigo industry and grow the rice industry to a point where it created an immense amount of wealth for America as a whole.
mm,
And I don't want the importance of our skills and knowledge and resources and creativity and
right,
all those things to be lost or to be forgotten.
right.
Um, and I do see if I have the chat open now. I see
Oh,
a few
sorry.
questions in here. Hi,
Oh,
Lasonia.
okay.
How do you find getting the young people more engaged into the importance of this knowledge? So Healing Roots is an intergenerational garden. And to be honest, it's been pretty easy to get kids engaged because they get to play outside, they get to be with their friends, they get to play in the dirt, they get to grow like cool and beautiful things, they get to try different foods. I can tell you how many times I've warned kids, don't eat the pepper right off the plant. It might be a little hot. But they do it anyway, and it's a fun learning experience for them. And it's also a fun learning experience for me. And it's a fun experience and affirming experience, especially for Black elders. Because a lot of them did grow up with these practices, or a lot of them grew up watching their mothers or their grandmothers with these different gardening practices and growing practices and culinary traditions. Like one of the things that I didn't mention, but one of the things that we do at Healing Roots is we make and can cha-cha together. So cha-cha is another one of those Black culinary traditions that was brought from the South, kind of to the North. I know a lot of people in Omaha aren't super familiar with it, but yeah, I think it just is really, like I said, affirming for older adults, and it is fun for kids, and it's intergenerational, which I love, and I think it's really important to be able to continue to pass down that knowledge and those traditions. Hi, Nancy. Now that I grow brown cotton, do I spin it? So I have not yet. I have looked at a few videos on YouTube showing me how. Right now with the cotton, where I'm at is turning it into paper. So I had the great opportunity of being able to meet some Chelsea, can't remember her last name right now, but she has a paper making studio in Council Bluffs. And I did not know what the process was to take this raw cotton and turn it into paper. And she was able to walk me through that process. And right now I have a bunch of pulp that is waiting to be turned into paper. And maybe this year, since I plan on having a lot more cotton, last year I just had 8 plants, then I might be able to do more with it. Nicole has a question as well. Hi, Nicole. I spent 2 years in sub-Saharan Africa, wondering if you have explored drought-tolerant varieties of flowers and food-bearing plants, such as teff, to grow here in Nebraska. May need a greenhouse to start them. Hi, Nicole. I spent time in sub-Saharan Africa as well. I studied abroad in South Africa, in Johannesburg, South Africa, a few years ago. And yes, I have brought some of those drought-tolerant plants that I learned about through my studies and then through my research to grow here in Nebraska. African daisies are actually native to South Africa. So I've grown a couple of different varieties of those. The African blue disc is probably the most popular one. I've also grown the Cape daisy. And then the most beautiful one, in my opinion, is the Prince Zulu Cape daisy. I've also grown Mexican sunflower, which is another great drought-tolerant variety. And although it's native to the Americas, and it's not native to sub-Saharan Africa, but it has been naturalized there, and it's used there a lot, especially in Kenya as fodder and feed for animals, and then also to, I forget the term, but to like make sure the soil stays together and doesn't get blown away by the wind. I forget what the term is called, but yeah, so that's a couple of varieties. I haven't heard of teff, but I will definitely look into it. And then another drought tolerant variety that we grow that most people probably don't think of, but it's the everyday garden variety, is marigolds. Like, they are super drought tolerant. They're native to the Americas. They are used to those conditions. And there are a few varieties that I've grown in the past that have been naturalized in Northern Africa. So in like Morocco and Algeria, in those areas there. And then there's another question for Peggy, from Peggy. Hi. This is a very interesting presentation. Thank you. I might have missed you addressing this, but are you part of a larger Omaha community garden project? So Peggy, I belong to a couple different community gardens and farming organizations here in Omaha. So Healing Roots African Diaspora Garden is the community garden that I organize on 24th and Pratt. Um, I am connected to the Big Garden, which is a very known um, nonprofit here, agricultural nonprofit here in Omaha. And they actually provide us with a huge amount of support every year. For example, this past year, over the winter, they overwintered some old-timey blue collards they had it in their greenhouse and then had a hoop house over it. That way we could save seeds for them this year. So those old-timey blue collards, which are African American heirloom variety that I'm happy to say I influenced a lot of folks in the growing community to grow last year. But they overwintered them. They are still in their hoop houses as of now. And as soon as the temperature allows, we are going to dig them up, plant them back at Healing Roots, and collect seed for them from them this spring and summer. So that's one gardening organization that I'm connected to. And like I said, they provide a huge amount of support to Healing Roots, and I'm super grateful and appreciative of that. I'm also connected to Omaha Sunflower Cooperative. So Omaha Sunflower Cooperative is a urban farming co-op that was created to support BIPOC farmers in the Omaha area. And Omaha Sunflower Co-op has provided us with support in a number of different areas. I would say particularly around like knowledge building. So they've helped us a lot in just teaching us more about best practices related to gardening. They've also been super supportive in providing us and letting us use different farming and gardening resources that we've needed over the years, like borrowing a tiller and being able to deliver like supplies and things in their pickup truck. And then most recently providing us with access to different grant opportunities. So that's one community that I'm another gardening community I'm part of. Sorry, it's been a long day, y'all. Is Blazing Star Seed Co-op. I mentioned them earlier, but they are a cooperative of farmers and gardeners that save seed specifically for the Omaha Seed Bank. And as I mentioned, like while we were getting ready for this call, Theon and I, a couple years ago, were both involved in planning the annual seed share. I think at the time it was probably the 8th annual seed share, which was a great opportunity to be a part of, and also connected me to a bunch of other gardening and farming organizations within the city, and in Bellevue too, so not just within the city. So yeah, those are my connections to the different community gardens in the area. I will also say that I've been grateful to be able to use Healing Roots as a connector for other community gardens to really get tapped into these resources and opportunities and tapped in with these other gardening groups that are already established. For example, I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with Hopescape, but they actually have a community garden on their property. And for the last 2 years, I've been able to work with them with doing activities and also provide them with seeds that were saved by Blazing Star Seed Co-op, so they can start their garden every year. I've also had the opportunity to be able to do that for other organizations. There's a local Girl Scouts troop that I've been able to work with, and even some undergraduate students at UNO, been able to connect them to resources like seeds and then other urban farming and gardening organizations. Thanks for your question.
Yeah, anybody else have any questions just while we're pausing? Clarice, I know you had a little bit more that we were gonna go through as well. Perfect. So honestly, we can keep going, and then, if anybody else has any questions, we're still gonna have time at the end too to answer questions. So,
Sorry.
oh no, you're okay. Don't
I'm
worry.
pressing buttons on my screen.
No, you're fine.
So I guess the next piece that I would like to talk about is the garden being a public space. I might need to grab some water. Sorry, 1 second.
You're okay. Yeah. I'll take this time to go ahead and just reiterate as well that this will be posted after the event is done if anyone is interested too. So I was just reminding everyone it'll be posted afterwards too.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that.
No, you're okay. Don't worry. I have mine right
Um,
next to me, so.
Yes. So, as I was saying, I wanted to take the next few minutes. I think we have about 10 minutes left to talk about the garden as a community space and a public space, and how important it is to have free and accessible third places within your neighborhoods where folks can gather. So that happens at the garden in a number of ways. Of course, there are activities that take place there that are directly related to gardening. So we have our garden cleanup and planting days and seed harvesting days and food processing days, right? And the other piece of it, the garden being a community space and a space for healing, we do a yoga in the garden series. So this is the second year that we'll be doing the yoga in the garden series, and it's really a great opportunity to combine the what's the word that I'm looking for? The intentional practice of yoga with the intentional practice of gardening and growing. And it has been super great so far, and I'm happy to be able to continue it. And it's been well received by the community. And it it just really, for me, emphasizes the importance and the connectedness of health and wellness between your body and movement, movement in gardening or movement in yoga, and then also what you put in your body. So in terms of having access to fresh food, fresh produce, and I will even say the affirming words that the yoga instructors always provide. So that is another piece of the Healing Roots programming. And the other part of it is the fun community centered events that get to happen in the garden that don't necessarily have any relationship to gardening. So for example, there is a open mic music festival that happens at the garden every year. This is actually the third year that it's going to be happening, and it gets bigger and better and more support every year. And it's amazing how things aligned. So the organizer, Kiara Marche, the organizer of this open mic festival, her grandmother is actually our neighbor at the garden. So her daughter used to come out all the time, and Kiara's daughter used to come out all the time and help us at the garden. And that's how I got to meet her. And that's how I found out that she was a musician, a performing artist, and a host, and just does all these great things. And, we made that connection, and also connected to the great need that the community had to be able to have access to spaces to do community-led events in. So
I was
yeah,
about to say, sorry, I was gonna interrupt real quick and say that's one of the things I really have appreciated too, looking at the garden and the events you do as well. I think there are just so many artists in Omaha, and specifically, like you mentioned, I think you do a really good job of intertwining those two, making that safe third space for people to be able to go and express themselves. So I just want to add on to that real quick.
thank you for that.
Yeah.
To be honest, I think that is all I have. So if anyone has any other questions,
I know
I'm
we have one in the Q&A right now. Go ahead and yeah, I'll go ahead and we'll send out the poll as well, just so that we can get that ahead. Just to reiterate as well, that's just so that we can get feedback for future programs, this program, everything like that. But yeah, opening questions up to Clarice and things about her. Um, oh, I meant to ask as well. I wanted to specifically say, where do you see the future of the garden going? And if anyone wants to volunteer, how do they get in contact with you?
That's an interesting question about the future of the garden. That's something that I've been contemplating as well. So I did not mention that the garden is on a city-owned lot.
Okay.
And every year we do a gardening agreement with them to be able to use that lot. Well,
Mhm.
now the city of Omaha is in the process of I would say reorganizing and creating new systems for the sale and distribution of the lots that are within their possession. And to be completely honest, the garden is on an amazing lot, and it's
They're
probably
trying to
not going
get
to
you
stay a
off of there.
community garden forever.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, it is in a prime area for development. It is one of the most densely populated areas in North Omaha. And I would even say that I also think that there could be a higher use for that lot as well. And I know that I've shared this in a class before, but there's also a historic significance to the lot that the
yeah.
garden is on too. It was the original site for the University of Omaha, so the original UNO campus was there as well. So I know the garden will continue, but just a matter of where it continues at is a question that I do not know the answer to.
Right. That's a beautiful thing though, because it's an idea. You can move it anywhere and it'll still be, the
Yeah.
same. So,
Yeah. And then what was the second part of that question? I'm sorry.
oh, it's okay. I was just asking, if people wanted to volunteer at the garden, how would they get in contact?
Yes, Instagram. That's where I'm the most active
Mhm.
at, is on Instagram. So we have a link in our bio where you can sign up to volunteer. You can also send an email to healingrootsomaha@gmail.com, and I'll be able to tap you into any up and coming volunteer opportunities.
Awesome.
And I would like to also say thank you to Heather for that resource. I will definitely look into it. I appreciate it.
Alrighty, perfect. So if that's everything, I would like to thank you, Clarice, for coming out. Thank you guys, everyone, for attending as well. It was lovely to talk with you, Clarice. Everybody have a good rest of your night and look forward to this posted on YouTube here in the next couple weeks.
Thank you. Good night.
Yeah, have a good night, guys. Bye.